There's something Marrow Creek didn't know about the woman they'd been ignoring for 12 years. And on a Friday in September 1879, they were about to find out. Her name was Nora Cole. She was 53
Keep moving.
years old.
We're almost there.
She
I
lived
see them.
6
They're
miles
coming.
east of town
Don't
on
look
a
back. Just
homestead
run.
I'm
that
with
had
you.
started with her husband's ambition and ended with his grave on a hill facing west. She came to town every second Friday to buy supplies: grain flour, lamp oil, sometimes coffee when she could justify the cost. That's all anyone knew. They didn't know about the Sharps rifle she kept oiled and sighted in the back room of her house. They didn't know she could read wind and distance the way most people read a newspaper. They didn't know about the night 7 years back when a man rode onto her land with intentions that never got to become actions. And they certainly didn't know that on this particular Friday, when 3 men with guns walked into the First Territorial Bank and a deputy hit the dust with a bullet in his side, the only person in Marrow Creek who could save them was a widow in a work dress the color of creek mud. The town called her that woman out on the coal place. Present, functional, unremarkable. They were wrong about all 3. September came to the territory the way it always did. Hot and dry, with dust hanging in the air like a question nobody wanted to answer. The sky was that particular shade of blue that happens when summer's dying but hasn't figured out how to let go yet. Nora left her homestead at dawn. 6 miles on horseback, taking the eastern road that cut through prairie grass tall enough to hide a deer. The land out here didn't forgive mistakes. 2 droughts in 12 years had taught her that. 1 flood. 1 winter that took 6 of their 7 cattle and all the chickens. She'd survived all of it. The ride took an hour and 17 minutes. She'd timed it enough to know. The horse was a paint mare, 15 years old, steady, and unimpressed by most things. Nora liked that about her. Too many creatures in this world got excited over nothing. Thomas had bought the mare the year before he died. Something reliable, he'd said, as if he'd known Nora would need reliability more than speed in the years to come. She pushed the thought away. Thoughts about Thomas had a way of taking up the whole morning if she let them. Marrow Creek wasn't much to look at. 200 people on a good day. 300 if you counted the ranches outside town. Main Street ran north to south, lined with false front buildings that looked bigger than they were. The hardware store, the dry goods, Miller's Feed and Grain, the First Territorial Bank, the sheriff's office with its 2 cells and 1 tired desk. The saloon opened at noon and closed when the last man fell over. Nora tied her horse outside Miller's at 11:17 in the morning. She knew the time because the church bell had just finished ringing the quarter hour. Len Marsh, who ran the feed store, nodded when she walked in. A careful nod, the kind you give someone you don't quite know what to do with. "Mrs. Cole," he said. "Mr. Marsh." That was the extent of most of her conversations in town. Polite, brief, careful not to invite anything more. She moved to the back where the grain was stored in burlap sacks stacked to the ceiling. 50 pounds of cracked corn, 20 pounds of oats. She was calculating the cost in her head when she heard it. The first shot. It came from the direction of Main Street, a flat crack that Nora recognized immediately. Not a revolver, a shotgun, likely a coach gun sawed off, which meant someone had come prepared. She set down the grain scoop, walked to the window, looked out. 3 men were moving fast across the street toward the bank. One of them carried a canvas sack. One of them had the shotgun covering the door. The third was already inside. In front of the sheriff's office, Deputy Clay Annis was down in the dust. He was moving but not standing, his hand pressed to his side, blood showing dark between his fingers. Nora watched for exactly 4 seconds. Then she went to the back room where she'd left the Sharps rifle leaning against the wall beside her other supplies. She'd brought it to town because she'd been planning to clean it this weekend. Old habit, the kind you develop when a rifle keeps you alive long enough that maintaining it becomes part of how you move through the world. She checked the load. 1 round in the chamber, 4 more in her apron pocket. She adjusted the rear sight. The notch and blade had been set for 400 yards the last time she'd used it. She dialed it down. Closer work today. The Sharps was a model 1874, 28-inch barrel, single-shot falling block action. the kind of rifle that required patience and precision in equal measure. Thomas had given it to her in the 4th year of their marriage. "You're already better than me," he'd said when he handed it over. "Might as well have the better rifle." He'd been right about that. She picked up the sharps, felt its familiar weight, checked the load one more time even though she'd just checked it. Then she walked to the side door, the one that opened onto the alley between the granary and the livery. Behind her, Len Marsh called out, "Mrs. Cole, maybe you should—" She stepped outside. The door closed behind her, and everything changed. Main Street was chaos now, people scattered like birds when a hawk passes overhead. Doors slammed, windows closed. The town was doing what towns do when violence arrives, disappearing into itself, leaving the problem for someone else to handle. Deputy Annis was still down, 20 feet from the sheriff's office door. He'd stopped moving as much. That wasn't good. The bank's front door was closed, 2 windows facing the street. Nora could see movement inside, shadows shifting, someone positioned at the east window watching. She moved along the alley wall, staying low, keeping the sharps vertical against her side. The rifle was 3 feet long and weighed 9 pounds. She'd carried heavier things. The loading area behind the bank was empty. That was either good or bad depending on what the men inside were planning. Nora filed it away. Information first, decisions later. She reached the corner where the alley met Main Street. Stopped, assessed. Sheriff Dale Vance was crouched behind the water trough in front of the mercantile. He had his revolver out, 6 rounds if he'd loaded it full this morning. She knew Vance by reputation. 9 years as sheriff, competent, fair, not stupid. Right now he looked like a man running out of options. Nora stayed in the shadow of the building, watched, calculated. 3 men inside, 1 at the window. That was the lookout. He'd be watching the street, tracking movement, calling out positions to the others. The other 2 would be managing the people inside. Hostages. However many had been in the bank when it started. The front door was a problem. 12-gauge trouble, Thomas would have called it. Anyone coming through that door was walking into a barrel. The back door might be clear, or it might be a trap. The roof of the hardware store across the street had a good angle on the south window. High ground, clear line of sight. But getting there meant crossing open space and hoping nobody inside was watching that direction. Nora thought about distance, wind, the angle of light through the windows. She thought about 7 people inside a building with 3 men who'd already shot a deputy. She thought about the promise she'd made to Thomas 12 years ago, about the land, about not letting anyone tell her what she couldn't do. Then she stepped out of the alley and walked toward the water trough where Sheriff Vance was running out of time. The Sharps had come into her life on a Tuesday. That's the kind of detail you remember when the thing being remembered changes everything that comes after. Not the month, not the weather, just Tuesday, 4th year of marriage. Evening light coming through the window, the color of honey. Thomas had walked in carrying the rifle wrapped in an old blanket, set it on the table like it was something fragile, which it wasn't. The Sharps was built to last longer than the people who used it. "Bought this from a man passing through," Thomas said. "He needed money more than he needed the gun." Nora had been kneading bread dough, flour on her hands and forearms. She'd stopped and looked at the blanket, at Thomas, back at the blanket. "We have a rifle," she said. "We have my rifle," Thomas said. "You're already a better shot than me. Might as well have the better rifle." He'd unwrapped it then. The Sharps lay there on their kitchen table like a promise someone was making, long and dark and serious. Nora had wiped her hands on her apron, picked it up, felt the weight distribution, the balance, brought it to her shoulder, sighted down the barrel at the far wall. "It's too much," she'd said. "It's exactly enough," Thomas had replied. "The coyotes found the sheep last week. We need someone who can hit what they're aiming at from a distance that matters." He'd been right about the coyotes. They'd lost 4 sheep in 3 nights. Nora had sat up in the loft with Thomas's old rifle and missed twice in the dark. The coyotes had learned to stay farther out. With the Sharps' distance stopped being a problem, Thomas had taught her the fundamentals: breath, sight picture, trigger press, follow through. but he'd known from the start that she didn't need much teaching. "You've got the patience for it," he'd said after watching her shoot for the first time. "Most people rush. You wait." She'd waited, and the coyotes had stopped coming. By the time she was 37, she rarely missed. By the time she came to Marrow Creek with Thomas to start the homestead, she'd stopped counting distance in feet and yards. She measured it in what it meant for a bullet. Elevation change, wind drift, the weight of the air on a cold morning versus a hot afternoon. The Sharps had a range that made most men uncomfortable, not the shooting of it. The understanding that a person standing that far away couldn't hear it coming, couldn't see it coming, had no defense except not being there. Thomas had understood that. He'd never been uncomfortable with what Nora could do. "A tool's only as good as the person using it," he used to say, "and you're better than most." They'd had 7 good years on the homestead, not easy years. The land was difficult and the weather was worse, but they'd had each other and they'd had a plan, and most days that was enough. Then Thomas got sick. It wasn't dramatic, no accident, no violence, just a fever that came on in March and never quite left. By April he was too weak to work. By May he was in bed most days. The doctor came out twice, said it was his lungs, said there wasn't much to be done except keep him comfortable. Thomas died on a Wednesday morning in June. The sky was the color of old paper. Nora had been sitting beside the bed when his breathing changed, then stopped. She'd sat there for a long time after, holding his hand, waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. They'd buried him on the hill that faced west. He'd always liked sunsets. Nora dug the grave herself. It took all day. The ground was harder than she'd expected. The night after the funeral, she'd sat at the kitchen table with the Sharps across her lap and a bottle of whiskey Thomas had been saving for something special. She'd poured one glass, drank it, poured another. The bank had sent a letter a week later, politely suggesting she might want to sell the land, offering to help her relocate somewhere more suitable for a woman alone. Nora had burned the letter in the stove. 3 months after Thomas died, the bank had tried again. This time it wasn't a suggestion. They were calling the loan. She had 90 days to pay what was owed, or they'd foreclose. The amount was more money than Nora had, more than she could make in 3 months, more than seemed possible. She'd sold every animal except one cow, sold every piece of jewelry she owned, sold every tool they had duplicates of, sold Thomas's good saddle and his pocket watch and the rifle he'd taught her with. She'd paid the bank in 60 days. The manager, a man named Fisk, had looked at her across his desk with something that might have been respect. "How will you survive the winter?" "Mrs. Cole, I'll manage," she'd said. And she had. But before she'd paid the bank, before she'd sold everything that could be sold, Thomas had asked her for something. It was the day before he died. He'd been in and out of consciousness most of the week. But that afternoon, he'd opened his eyes and looked at her with a clarity that had been missing for days. "Nora," he'd said, his voice barely there. "Promise me something." She'd leaned close. "Anything. Promise me you won't let them take it." "Take what?" "The land." His hand had found hers, weak but certain. "It's yours. It's ours. Don't let anyone tell you a woman can't hold it. Thomas, promise me." She'd looked at his face, at the man she'd loved for 11 years, at the determination still there even when everything else was failing. "I promise," she'd said. "I promise, Thomas, I won't let them take it." He'd closed his eyes then, smiled. "Good. You're stronger than they know, stronger than you know." The next morning he was gone. 12 years she'd kept that promise, through 2 droughts and 1 flood, through the winter of 1874 that had nearly killed her, through every time someone in town suggested she sell, every time someone asked why she didn't remarry, every time someone looked at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. She'd kept the land because Thomas had asked her to. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about Thomas. It had started being about her. Now she was standing in the middle of Colton Street with the sharps in her hands and Sheriff Vance staring at her like she'd appeared out of thin air, which from his perspective she had. "Ma'am," Vance said. He was being careful, trying to place her, trying to figure out what a woman with a rifle was doing in the middle of his crisis. Nora looked at the bank, at the window where the lookout was positioned, at the loading area in back. "3 inside," she said. "1 at the east window, 1 behind the teller counter, 1 in the back with the manager. The man at the window is the one you need to worry about. He's watching the street. The other 2 are managing people." Vance stared at her. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because that's how I do it," Nora said. Deputy Annis was still breathing, barely. Vance had checked on him twice from behind the water trough. Twice he'd risked a bullet to make sure his deputy wasn't bleeding out in the dust of Main Street. The second time he'd almost caught one. A round had punched through the trough 6 inches from his head. Water had started leaking out, a slow stream running into the dirt. Now Vance was crouched behind weakening cover with a wounded deputy 20 feet away and no good options. He looked at the woman who'd just walked up beside him, tried to place her. Something familiar about her face, but he couldn't pin it down. Then it came to him. "Mrs. Cole," he said. "From the homestead east of town." "That's right." "You come into town every second Friday." "I do." "For supplies." "Usually." Vance looked at the Sharps rifle in her hands, looked back at her face. "That's a long gun for buying grain," he said. "It's a long day," Nora replied. Despite everything, Vance almost smiled. "Can you use that?" he asked, nodding at the Sharps. "Yes." "How well?" "Well enough." Vance processed that, looked at the bank, looked at his deputy, looked at the empty street where 47 townspeople had discovered urgent reasons to be elsewhere. He was a practical man. 9 years wearing a badge had taught him to recognize when pride needed to step aside for necessity. "What do you need?" he asked. Nora pointed at the hardware store roof across the street. 20 minutes to get there, and for you to keep their attention on the front." "Then what?" "Then we'll see what presents itself." Vance studied her. This woman he'd seen in town 100 times but never really looked at. This woman who'd just analyzed a hostage situation like she'd done it before. "Can you shoot through glass?" he asked. "At this angle, yes, but it ends the negotiation and starts something else." "What are their demands?" "Haven't made any yet," Vance said. "But usually it's horses and a clear road out." Nora thought about that. "They'll want to use the civilians as cover to the edge of town, then release them when they're clear. Or not release them. Or not." She looked at the bank again, at the shadow on the south window, at the distance to the back loading area, at the angle of light. "I need 20 minutes," she said again. Vance made a decision, the kind you make when you're out of options and someone who sounds competent offers you one. "You've got it," he said. Nora nodded, started to move. "Mrs. Cole," Vance called after her. She stopped, looked back. "Thank you," he said. "Thank me when they're all alive," she replied. Then she was gone, moving low along the building fronts, heading for the alley that would take her around to Marsh's hardware store. Vance watched her go. Then he stood up from behind the water trough, exposed himself, made himself the thing they'd be watching. He cupped his hands around his mouth, and he did something he'd never done in 9 years of wearing a badge. He asked for help. "Is there a sharpshooter around here?" His voice echoed off the false fronts of the buildings, bounced down Main Street, came back to him carrying all the desperation he'd tried to keep out of it. Nobody answered. Nobody moved. The echo faded into the hot September silence. Vance stood there, exposed, waiting. 8 seconds passed, long enough for him to feel every eye in town watching him through curtains and cracks in shuttered windows, long enough for him to start wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake. Then a door opened. Not the saloon door like he'd expected, not the sheriff's office, not any of the places where the men with guns and badges usually came from. The side door of Miller's Feed and Grain, the one that opened onto the alley. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a work dress the color of creek mud, an apron she hadn't bothered to remove, a hat that had been through enough weather to have opinions about it. In her hands was a Sharps rifle. She walked to the center of the street, stood beside Sheriff Vance, held up the rifle so everyone could see. Her name was Nora Cole. She was 53 years old. She'd been living 6 miles outside this town for 12 years, and nobody, not one person in Marrow Creek, had known her name until right now. Vance looked at her, really looked at her this time. "Mrs. Cole," he said quietly, "people are going to talk about this for a very long time." Nora adjusted the rear sight on the Sharps, checked the load one more time. "Let them talk," she said. Inside the bank, Dutch Rearan had been doing this kind of work for 6 years. He'd learned early that most robberies failed because people got excited, started yelling, started shooting, turned a simple extraction of money into a bloodbath that brought every lawman in 3 counties. Dutch didn't get excited. Right now he was at the east window, watching the sheriff behind the water trough, watching the street, watching for anything that looked like a problem forming. He'd seen the deputy go down. That had been Lark's doing. Jumpy kid with a shotgun and no patience. Dutch had told him explicitly no shooting unless absolutely necessary. But Lark had seen the deputy reaching for his gun and had panicked. Now there was blood in the street and a clock ticking faster than Dutch liked. Behind him, Cobb was managing the civilians, 7 of them. The bank manager, Fisk, was sitting against the wall with his hands on his knees. Calm. Too calm, actually, which made him either brave or calculating. Dutch would put money on calculating. 2 tellers, young, frightened, manageable, 4 customers, an older woman, 2 men who looked like ranch hands, a young mother with a boy who couldn't have been more than 6. The mother was the one Dutch was worried about. She had that particular kind of quiet that came from terror held barely in check. People that quiet could panic suddenly, and when they did, everyone else followed. "Keep them calm," Dutch called to Cobb without looking away from the window. "Working on it," Cobb replied. In the back office, Lark was supposed to be loading the money from the safe into the canvas sack, but Dutch could hear him moving around too much, opening drawers, looking for more. Greedy. That was going to be a problem eventually. Dutch saw the sheriff stand up, expose himself. That was interesting. Either brave or stupid. Possibly both. Then the sheriff cupped his hands and shouted, "Is there a sharpshooter around here?" Dutch smiled. Couldn't help it. That was desperation, pure and simple. The echo faded. Nobody answered. 8 seconds of silence. Then a door opened across the street. A woman walked out. Older. Work dress, hat, and a rifle that Dutch recognized immediately. Sharps, long barrel, serious piece of equipment. She walked to the middle of the street like she owned it, stood beside the sheriff, held up the rifle. Dutch leaned closer to the window, studied her. Something about the way she moved. Economical. No wasted motion. The rifle wasn't for show. She knew how to use it. "We've got a problem," he said. "What kind?" Cobb asked from behind him. "The kind that shoots back," Dutch said. Outside, Vance was having a similar realization. He'd asked for a sharpshooter. He'd gotten a 53-year-old woman in a work dress who came to town twice a month to buy grain. But the way she was reading the situation made him reconsider every assumption he'd been carrying. 3 inside, she'd said, confident. 1 at the east window. Vance looked. Couldn't see anyone from this angle. "How do you know?" he asked. Nora nodded toward the glass. "Shadow on the floor. Sun's behind us. Anyone standing near that window throws a shadow you can see from here. Watch the angle." He watched. She was right. The shadow shifted. Someone moving inside. "You can take him from here?" Vance asked. "Through glass at this angle, yes. But it ends the negotiation and starts something else." She paused, looked at the bank, at the loading area in back, at the roof of the hardware store. "What are their demands?" she asked. "Haven't made any yet." "Then they will. Probably horses and a clear road. They'll want to use the civilians as cover to the edge of town. Release them when they're clear." "You think they'll release them?" "I think they'll say they will." Vance felt something shift, a recalibration. This woman wasn't guessing. She was thinking like them, understanding their logic from the inside. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "have you done this before?" "Define this," Nora said. "Dealt with armed men in a hostage situation." "No." "Then how?" "Because that's how I'd do it," she said again. "If I wanted money and an escape. That's the play that makes sense." She pointed at the south window. "He'll move again in the next minute, east to south, checking angles, making sure you don't have anyone flanking." Vance waited. 50 seconds later, the shadow in the east window disappeared, reappeared in the south window. "How did you know?" Vance asked. "Pattern," Nora said. "Every 90 seconds or so, he's checking his coverage." She looked at Vance. "I need to get to the hardware store roof, but I need you to keep him looking this direction." "How?" "Start talking to him. Demands, negotiation, keep it going." "And then what?" "And then I'll be somewhere else when this starts." Vance thought about it, looked at the woman beside him, at the Sharp's rifle, at the calm competence in her face. He'd been sheriff for 9 years. He'd handled bar fights and claim disputes and one attempted murder, but he'd never handled this, and right now the only person offering him a solution was someone he'd never given a second thought to. Pride, he decided, could wait. "All right," he said. "How long do you need to eat?" 20 minutes. "You've got it." Nora nodded, started to move toward the alley. "Mrs. Cole," Vance called. She stopped, looked back. "When you get up there," he said, "don't shoot unless you're sure." "I'm always sure, Sheriff," Nora said. And then she was gone. Vance waited until she disappeared around the corner. Then he stood up, fully exposed now, making himself the target they'd be watching. He called out toward the bank. "Inside. This is Sheriff Dale Vance. I want to talk terms." A pause. Long enough that Vance wondered if they'd answer at all. Then the front window opened, 6 inches. A voice came out, flat, controlled, professional. "Terms are simple, Sheriff. Horses at the south gate in 20 minutes. We ride out with 2 of yours as insurance. Release them at Miller's Creek 5 miles out." "That's not a terms offer," Vance said. "That's a demand." "That's correct." "I need something in exchange. Show me the civilians are all right." Another pause. Longer this time. Then the door opened. A young woman came out, one of the tellers, moving carefully. The kind of careful that comes from being told exactly what to do and doing it precisely. She walked to the center of the street, said 4 words. "Everyone's alive. Everyone's scared." Then she walked back inside. The door closed. Vance looked at the bank, at the windows, at the roof of the hardware store where a woman with a Sharp's rifle was positioning herself right now. He thought about the 7 people inside, about Deputy Annis bleeding in the street, about the choice he'd just made to trust someone he didn't know. 20 minutes, he thought, and then we'll see. Inside the First Territorial Bank of Marrow Creek time moved differently. Out on the street, 20 minutes was a negotiation, a tactical delay, a window of opportunity. Inside 20 minutes was an eternity measured in heartbeats and shallow breaths and the particular kind of silence that comes from 7 people trying very hard not to be noticed. Albert Fisk sat with his back against the wall beneath the teller counter. His hands rested on his knees. He'd stopped shaking about 10 minutes ago. Stopped because shaking used energy he might need later. Stopped because the man with the revolver, the one they called Cobb, was watching everyone, and Fisk didn't want to give him a reason to pay special attention. Fisk was 45 years old. He'd managed this bank for 8 years. He had a wife named Margaret and 2 daughters, 7 and 9. They'd be expecting him home for supper. He was going to get home for supper. That was the calculation he'd made. Stay calm. Stay controlled. Do what they said. Survive. Across from him, the 2 tellers huddled together. Sam Worthy, 19, fresh out of school, hired 3 months ago. And Clara Jensen, 22, engaged to the blacksmith's son, planning a wedding for next spring. Sam was crying quietly, trying not to, failing. Clara had her hand on his arm. "Steady. Breathe," she whispered. "Just breathe." Near the door, Sarah Brennan held her son against her chest. The boy's name was Daniel, 6 years old. He'd been excited about coming to town today. His first time depositing money he'd saved from helping his father with the horses. Now he had his face pressed into his mother's shoulder, and he was trying very hard to be brave because his mother had told him brave boys stayed quiet and still. Sarah stroked his hair, whispered things that didn't matter. The words weren't important. The sound of her voice was calm, steady. "Everything's going to be all right." She didn't believe it, but she said it anyway, because that's what mothers did. Peter Dunn sat near the back wall, 24 years old, clerk at the land office. He'd come to deposit the week's receipts. He kept looking at the back door. He'd counted the distance, 12 feet, maybe 15. If he moved fast, if he was quiet, if the man in the back office didn't see him, he could make it. He could get help. He could be a hero. Cobb saw him looking, moved closer, leaned down, spoke quietly enough that only Peter could hear. "Don't," Cobb said. One word, flat, final. Peter looked up at him, saw something in the man's face that made him understand very clearly what would happen if he tried. He stopped looking at the door. Dutch moved from the south window back to the east, checked the street. The sheriff was still there, still talking, buying time for something. The woman with the Sharps rifle was gone. That bothered Dutch more than it should have. Professional criminals developed instincts. The good ones listened to those instincts. The ones who didn't ended up dead or in prison. Right now, Dutch's instincts were telling him that woman was a problem he should have paid more attention to. "How much longer?" he called to Lark in the back office. "Almost done," Lark said, but his voice had that quality Dutch recognized, the sound of someone lying about being almost done. 2 minutes, Dutch said. "Then we move whether you're ready or not." In the back office, Lark stuffed another stack of bills into his coat pocket. The canvas sack was already full. This was extra. His extra. Dutch and Cobb didn't need to know about it. He checked the back door. Clear loading area. No one watching. He could leave right now. Take the money. Take the horse he'd arranged separately. Be gone before Dutch even realized. He put his hand on the door handle. On the hardware store roof, Nora settled into position. She'd come up through Marsh's loft, through the storage area where he kept the lumber and the extra stock, up a ladder to the roof access. Quiet, careful, leaving no trace. The roof was tar paper and wooden shingles, hot from the sun, soft enough that she had to distribute her weight carefully. She crawled to the front parapet. Low, flat, the Sharps horizontal beside her. From here she had a clear line of sight to both front windows of the bank. The south window at an angle, the east window straight on. She could see the loading area in back. Could see the sheriff at the water trough. Could see Deputy Annis in the street. He'd stopped moving. Nora hoped that meant unconscious, not dead. She settled the Sharps into position, checked the sight picture, adjusted for the angle. The distance was 70 yards to the front of the bank, 85 to the loading area. Not far. Not for the Sharps. The wind was from the northeast. Light. Maybe 8 miles an hour. At this distance it wouldn't matter much. She found her breathing. Slowed it. Let her heart rate settle. Then she waited. Waiting was something Nora understood. While she waited, she thought about the moments that had brought her here. Not the whole 12 years. That was too much. Too heavy. If she let herself think about all of it, she'd drown in the weight of it. Instead, she thought about 3 moments. 3 points where she'd made a choice that defined who she became. The first moment was winter. February 1874. The winter that nearly killed her. By January, she'd already lost 6 of the 7 cattle. The cold had come early and stayed late. Snow up to the fence posts. Wind that cut through every gap in the house walls. She'd survived on stored grain and whatever she could shoot. But by February, even the deer had moved to lower ground. The rabbits had disappeared. The birds had gone south. She had one deer left to carry her through to March. One shot. She'd tracked it for 3 hours through snow that came up to her knees. Found it bedded down in a draw 2 miles from the house. The wind was wrong. The distance was impossible. 400 yards across a valley with nothing to brace against. She'd set up on a flat rock, used her coat as a rest, sighted through scope glass that kept fogging from her breath. The deer stood, quartering away. Bad angle. She had one round. If she missed, she'd have to track it again. If she tracked it again, she'd use energy she didn't have. She thought about Thomas, about what he'd say. Wait for the shot. Don't force it. She waited. The deer turned. Broadside. Perfect angle. She took the shot. The sharps kicked. The deer dropped. Nora had sat there for a long moment, relief flooding through her so hard it felt like pain. Then she'd walked 400 yards through the snow to field dress it, carried 80 pounds of meat back to the house in 3 trips. She'd made it through March. That was the moment she learned she could survive anything if she was patient enough. The second moment was 7 years ago. May, late night, moon 3/4 full. She'd heard the horse before she saw it. Hoofbeats on hard ground, coming fast, coming toward the house. Nobody rode to the Cole homestead at night unless something was wrong. Nora had been in the loft, checking on the hay stores. She'd had the sharps with her out of habit. She'd gone to the loft door, looked out. A man on horseback, riding hard, circling the house, looking for something, looking for her. She'd watched him for 30 seconds, watched the way he moved, the way he checked the windows, the way he dismounted and started toward the door. She'd recognized intent before he'd gotten close enough to act on it. Nora had loaded the sharps, sighted on the horse, center mass, impossible to miss. She'd fired. The horse had gone down. The man had hit the ground hard, scrambled up, looked around wildly, couldn't see where the shot had come from. She'd worked the action, ejected the spent case, loaded another round. The man had looked at his horse, dead in the dust, looked at the house, at the loft, at the darkness where something had just killed his animal from a distance he couldn't see. He'd run, limped, favored his left side where he'd hit the ground. Nora had watched him disappear into the darkness, headed west, on foot. She'd never reported it, never told anyone, never checked to see if he'd made it to the next town or died out there in the prairie. For 7 years she'd wondered. For 7 years she'd carried the weight of not knowing. There's blood on this rifle I can't see, she'd told herself on the nights when sleep wouldn't come. That was the moment she learned that some choices follow you forever. The third moment was smaller, quieter. 3 years ago, November, first frost. She'd been in town for supplies, heard at the dry goods that Widow Henderson, who lived south of town, was sick. No family, no help, nobody was going to check on her. Nora had bought extra flour, extra beans, coffee, lamp oil, loaded it all into her wagon. That night she'd ridden to the Henderson place, left the supplies on the porch, knocked once, left before anyone answered. She'd done it every winter since, never told anyone, never asked for recognition. The next time she came to town, she'd heard Widow Henderson telling someone at the mercantile that God had sent an angel with supplies. Nora had bought her grain and left. That was the moment she learned that being invisible had its uses, that helping people didn't require being seen, that maybe, just maybe, the way the town looked at her or didn't look at her was something she could use for good. These 3 moments, these 3 choices, patience, conscience, quiet service, they'd made her into the woman lying flat on a hardware store roof with a Sharps rifle and 7 people counting on her to be exactly who she'd become. She brought her eye to the rear sight. Time to find out if 12 years of being invisible had prepared her for the moment when everyone would finally see. Vance was running out of conversation. He'd stalled for 15 minutes, asked about the hostages 3 more times, negotiated horse numbers, discussed routes out of town, bought every second he could. The voice from the bank Dutch, though Vance didn't know his name yet, was getting impatient. "Sheriff, I appreciate the effort, but we're past talking. You've got 5 minutes to get those horses to the south gate, or we start making noise in here. The kind of noise that ends with you carrying people out." Vance looked at the bank, at the windows, at the roof where he couldn't see Nora but knew she was there. He needed more time. "The livery owner isn't here," Vance said, completely fabricated. "I need to find him to authorize the horses." A pause. "You've got 3 minutes to find him. After that we stop being professional about this." The window closed. Vance crouched back behind the water trough. The leak had gotten worse. Water pooling in the dirt. His cover was degrading by the minute. He looked toward the alley where young Deputy Hooper should have been positioned by now, saw movement, a careful wave. Hooper was there. Ready. Good. Vance pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket. The feed receipt Nora had torn a strip from earlier, weighted with a piece of gravel, dropped over the parapet of the hardware store roof. It had landed 3 feet from the water trough. Vance had picked it up, read the 4 words written in pencil. Back door. 2 minutes. He'd put it in his pocket, looked at the alley, nodded to Hooper. Now those 2 minutes were coming. Inside the bank, Lark made his decision. The money was in the sack. Extra money was in his pockets. The back door was clear. He was leaving. Dutch and Cobb could handle their own exit. They'd been doing this longer than him anyway. They didn't need him. He checked the back office one more time, made sure he hadn't left anything. Picked up the canvas sack. Heavy. Satisfying. He walked to the back door, put his hand on the handle, listened. Nothing. No sound from the loading area. No one watching. He opened the door, stepped outside into the September heat. The loading area was empty, just like he'd checked, just like it should be. He took 3 steps, saw the woman. She was standing 8 feet away, in the shadow of the north wall. Work dress, hat, Sharp's rifle held low and ready. Lark stopped. They looked at each other. The woman spoke, voice quiet, calm, like she was asking about the weather. "Set it down." Lark looked at her, at the rifle, at the distance between them. He was young, fast, good with a gun. She was 53, a woman, farmer's wife. He'd made a career out of being faster than people who underestimated him. He went for the pistol at his hip. On the hardware store roof, Nora had seen Lark step into the loading area. She'd seen him pause, assess, start to relax. She'd already been moving. Off the roof, down through the loft, through the back, along the south alley wall, fast, flat. The Sharps vertical at her side. She'd reached the loading area 30 seconds before he opened the door, positioned herself in the shadow, where the sun wouldn't give her away. Waited. The door had opened. Lark stepped out. Young, carrying the money sack, nervous energy in every movement. She'd given him a chance. "Set it down." His hand went for his gun. Some people, Nora thought, never learned to reconsider their assumptions. The Sharps fired. The sound was enormous, flat and hard and final, the kind of sound that doesn't just stop a moment, it erases it and replaces it with something else entirely. The bullet took the gun out of Lark's hand without taking the hand with it. He'd been drawing, fast, smooth, the kind of draw that came from practice. The Sharps had been faster. The revolver spun through the air, landed 15 feet away in the dirt. Lark sat down, hard. He stared at his hand, all 5 fingers still attached. No blood, just a deep bruise forming where the gun had been ripped from his grip. He made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a scream. The sound of a man discovering that everything he'd believed about speed and skill and survival had just been proven wrong by a woman twice his age with a rifle he'd never seen coming. "Stay," Nora said. He stayed. Inside the bank, the Sharps at close range did something to the atmosphere. It removed the sense that anyone was in control. Dutch dropped to the floor. Instinct. Cover. Away from the windows. Cobb spun toward the back, revolver coming up, trying to locate the threat. The 7 civilians found the floor immediately. Fisk covered the tellers. Sarah Brennan covered her son. Peter Dunn pressed himself against the wall and discovered that being a hero was much less appealing when actual shooting started. "Back door!" Dutch shouted. "Lark!" No answer. Cobb moved toward the back office. Careful, gun up. He reached the door, looked out. Saw Lark sitting in the dirt of the loading area. Hands up, revolver gone. Saw a woman in a work dress standing over him with a Sharps rifle. Saw Deputy Hooper coming around the north corner, rifle aimed. Saw Sheriff Vance coming through the front door behind them. Cobb lowered his gun. "We're done," he said. It took 4 more minutes to end. Not because there was resistance, but because Dutch Rearin was a professional and professionals didn't panic even when the situation had gone completely sideways. He'd set his revolver on the floor, pushed it away with his boot, put his hands up. "Nobody needs to get hurt," he'd said. Calm, reasonable, a man accepting the mathematics of a situation that had stopped being in his favor. Cobb had done the same. Set his gun down, hands up, silent. Lark in the loading area sat in the dust with his hands on his head and tried very hard not to think about how close he'd come to losing his entire hand instead of just his gun. By noon, all 3 of them were in the jail. The 7 civilians came out blinking into September sunlight. Fisk sat on the bank steps for a moment, put his face in his hands, composed himself, stood back up. He had a wife and daughters expecting him. Sarah Brennan held her son. Daniel was crying now, the kind of crying that comes after being brave for too long. She let him, whispered that it was over. They were safe. The 2 tellers, Sam and Clara, held each other and shook. Peter Dunn walked out and immediately started working out the best order to tell the story. This was going to be the defining moment of his life. He needed to get it right. Deputy Annis was alive. The doctor, a man named Sullivan, had reached him while the standoff was ending. The bullet had gone through his side without hitting anything vital. Lot of blood, lot of pain. But he'd keep the leg. He'd walk again. "You're lucky," Sullivan told him. "Don't feel lucky," Annis said. But he was smiling. Nora stood at the water trough reloading the Sharps out of habit. 1 round fired, 1 round replaced. The ritual of it calmed her. Familiar motion, known process. Sheriff Vance walked over, stood for a moment. He was a man who chose his words carefully. "That shot," he said finally. "Yes," Nora said. "From that distance, through a doorway, moving target." "Yes." "You chose not to kill him." Nora worked the action, set the fresh round. "Dead men don't stand trial. He needs to answer for what he did in that bank." Vance processed that, looked at her, at the Sharps, at this woman who'd appeared out of nowhere and resolved a situation he couldn't have resolved alone. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "I've been sheriff for 9 years. I've handled bar fights and claim disputes and 1 attempted murder, but I've never seen anything like what you just did." Nora picked up what remained of her feed receipt. The strip she'd torn off earlier was in Vance's pocket, evidence of a plan that had worked. "I still need 50 pounds of grain," she said. She walked back toward Miller's feed. Behind her the street was reassembling itself, doors opening, voices returning, the slow resumption of business in a town that had just discovered something about itself it would need to revise. It started small, the way these things do. Len Marsh, who ran the feed store, told his wife, who told her sister, who worked at the hotel, who told the guests. The doctor told his assistant about the wound, about the angle, about the deliberate precision of it. Could have killed him easy, chose not to. That's skill and restraint. Deputy Hooper told 3 different people about the loading area, about Nora saying, "Nobody fires unless I do first," about the way she'd stood in the shadow waiting for Lark like she'd done it 100 times before. His account remained consistent. That itself said something about what he'd seen. By evening, Marrow Creek had a story. By Friday evening, the story had acquired detail, specificity, the kind that comes when people who witnessed different parts start comparing notes. She was on the hardware store roof. She calculated the wind. She shot the gun right out of his hand from 30 feet. I heard it was 50. I heard she didn't even blink. That night in the jail, Dutch Rearan sat on the cot in his cell and thought about the woman with the Sharps rifle. Something about her had been familiar. Not her face, but the way she'd moved, the way she'd positioned, the way she'd made a decision and executed it without hesitation. He'd seen that before. He asked the night deputy, an older man named Carson, about her. "Mrs. Cole lives out east, keeps to herself, widow, been here about 12 years. She always been that good with a rifle." Carson shrugged. "Nobody knew she could shoot at all until today." Dutch lay back on the cot, stared at the ceiling. 12 years living 6 miles from town, and nobody knew she could shoot. That was either remarkable luck or remarkable discipline. He suspected discipline. In the cell next to him, Lark cradled his bruised hand and tried to understand how he'd drawn on a woman with a long rifle and lost. The mathematics didn't work. She'd been 8 feet away, rifle low. He'd been fast. She'd been faster. No, not faster. She'd already been aimed, already been ready. She'd known he was going to draw before he'd made the decision. That was the part that bothered him. She'd read him, understood him, been 2 moves ahead the entire time. He looked at his hand. 5 fingers, all intact. She could have taken them, could have taken his life. She'd chosen not to. He didn't know if that made it better or worse. In the third cell, Cobb said nothing. He'd made his peace with it the moment he'd seen Nora in the loading area. Some situations you won, some you lost. Professional criminals understood that. What interested him was the woman herself, the calm in her eyes, the way she'd held the rifle like it was part of her. That came from years, from practice, from a life lived in a way most people never saw. He wondered what her story was, wondered if anyone in this town had ever bothered to ask. 3 blocks away, Nora sat at her small table in the room she rented above the Mercantile when she stayed in town overnight. She cleaned the Sharps, disassembled it, wiped down each piece, applied fresh oil, reassembled it. The ritual took 20 minutes. When she was done, she sat with the rifle across her lap and looked out the window at Main Street. People were still out, still talking, still processing. She could hear her name in the conversations that drifted up. "Mrs. Cole?" Nora Cole. That woman from the Cole place. For 12 years she'd been invisible. Now in the space of one afternoon she'd become the thing everyone was looking at. She wasn't sure how she felt about that yet. Thomas would have called this interesting. She thought about him, about the promise, about the land waiting 6 miles east, about the choice she'd made to step into the street instead of staying in the shadows. Tomorrow she'd ride home, back to the homestead, back to the quiet, back to being alone with the memory of her husband and the land they'd tried to build something on. But tonight she sat in a rented room and listened to a town that had finally learned her name. The next morning, Nora came down to the Mercantile to settle her account. She'd slept 4 hours, maybe 5. The adrenaline from yesterday had taken a long time to fade. Even now her hands remembered the weight of the Sharps, the kick, the moment between decision and action. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the Mercantile, looked up when Nora walked in. "Mrs. Cole," she said, different than before. The words carried weight now, recognition. "Mrs. Patterson, your grain is ready. Len Marsh brought it over this morning. Said you'd paid for it yesterday before." She trailed off. "Before everything happened." "Thank you." Nora moved to check the sacks. 50 pounds of cracked corn, 20 pounds of oats, same as always. Behind her, Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "Mrs. Cole, I wanted to say, what you did yesterday, that took considerable courage." Nora turned, looked at the older woman, saw something in her face that hadn't been there before. Not just recognition, something closer to respect. "I did what needed doing," Nora said. "Most people wouldn't have. Most people weren't in a position to." Mrs. Patterson studied her. "You've been coming here every second Friday for 12 years. I've sold you supplies, taken your money, never really talked to you beyond that." You were always polite. Polite isn't the same as seeing someone. Mrs. Patterson paused. I'm sorry for that. Nora didn't know what to say. Apologies for invisibility were new territory. It's all right, she said finally. It's not, Mrs. Patterson said. But maybe it can be different now. Nora loaded her wagon in front of the mercantile. The grain sacks were heavy, but she'd handled them before. Muscle memory, known weight. People passed on the street. More than usual for the Saturday morning. Word had spread fast. They nodded to her, tipped their hats, said her name. Mrs. Cole. Morning, Mrs. Cole. Fine shooting yesterday, ma'am. Each acknowledgement felt strange, like putting on a coat that didn't quite fit yet. She was securing the last sack when Len Marsh walked over from his feed store. Mrs. Cole, he said. Got a minute? She nodded. Marsh looked uncomfortable. A man working up to something. I've been thinking about yesterday, he said. About what you did. And I've been thinking about the 12 years before that. All the times you came in for supplies. He paused. You were always on time, always knew exactly what you needed, always paid what you owed, never asked for credit, never complained about prices. I appreciate fair dealing, Nora said. That's just it, Marsh said. You were dealing fair with us for 12 years, but I don't know that we were seeing you, not really. He shifted his weight. My wife reminded me last night. You've never been late, not once in 12 years. Most folks, they miss a week here and there. Get busy. Forget. But you, every second Friday like clockwork. It's good to have a schedule. It's more than that. Marsh looked at her directly. That's discipline. That's someone who decided how things would be and then made it so. Someone reliable. Nora didn't know what to say to that either. I just wanted you to know, Marsh said. We noticed that. After. Should have noticed it before. He nodded and walked back to his store. Nora stood beside her wagon and let the words settle. The doctor found her an hour later. She'd been at the dry goods buying lamp oil and coffee. Dr. Sullivan came in, saw her, walked over. Mrs. Cole, I was hoping to run into you. Doctor? I wanted to tell you about Deputy Annis. The wound's clean, no infection. He'll make a full recovery. I'm glad to hear it. Sullivan looked at her carefully. When I got to him yesterday, he'd lost a fair amount of blood. But someone had applied pressure to the wound before I arrived. Proper pressure, right spot, kept him from losing more. Nora said nothing. That was you, wasn't it? Sullivan said. Before you went after the men in the bank. You stopped to help him first. He was bleeding. Most people would have panicked. Or run. You knew what to do. Pressure stops bleeding, Nora said. That's not complicated. Knowing it and doing it under fire are different things. Sullivan paused. Where did you learn field medicine? Homestead living, Nora said. Animals get hurt. People get hurt. You learn or things die. Sullivan nodded slowly. Mrs. Cole, I've been practicing medicine in this town for 15 years, and I'm realizing I never asked what skills you might have, what you might know. Nobody asked, Nora said simply. No, Sullivan said. We didn't. That's on us. By noon, Nora was ready to leave town. She'd finished her business, settled her accounts. The wagon was loaded. She was walking toward her horse when Deputy Hooper intercepted her. Mrs. Cole, Sheriff Vance would like to see you, if you have time. Nora looked at the young deputy, remembered him from yesterday, at the loading area, nervous energy barely contained. All right, she said. Vance was in his office. He stood when she entered. Mrs. Cole, thank you for coming. Deputy Hooper said you wanted to see me. I did. Vance gestured to a chair. Please. Nora sat. Vance settled back behind his desk. He had papers in front of him. Notes. Something official. I've been asking around, he said. About you. About your time here in Marrow Creek. Nora waited. Did you know that Widow Henderson thinks an angel leaves supplies on her porch every winter? Nora kept her expression neutral. She told half the town about it, Vance continued. Anonymous gifts, flour, beans, lamp oil, coffee, shows up every November for the past 8 years. He looked at her. That was you, wasn't it? I don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Cole, the supplies show up every second Friday in November, same day you come to town, same items you buy in larger quantities that week. Nora said nothing. Vance smiled. I also talked to Deputy Hooper. He told me about 3 years ago when he was delivering a calf to a ranch east of town. His horse went lame. You were passing by. You set the leg, gave him your spare mount, sent him home. He needed help. He tried to return the horse. You told him to keep it. I had another horse. You gave away a horse, Mrs. Cole. That's not nothing. Not for someone working a homestead alone. Nora shifted in her chair. This conversation was going somewhere she didn't quite understand yet. Vance pulled another paper. I also checked the bank records. With Mr. Fisk's permission. When your husband died, the bank moved to foreclose. You had 90 days to pay. I paid. You paid in 60 days. Do you know how you did that? I sold things. You sold everything except what you needed to survive. Every animal but one cow. Every tool you had duplicates of. Your jewelry, your husband's good saddle and pocket watch. Vance looked up. You paid the bank and kept the land. I promised Thomas I would. Most people would have sold, would have moved somewhere easier, somewhere they had family or support. I didn't have family, and I had everything I needed. Vance set the papers down, leaned forward. Mrs. Cole, I've been sheriff here for 9 years, and I'm realizing that for 12 of those years you've been living 6 miles from town, coming in every other week, doing business, being polite, being reliable, helping people quietly, and not one of us really saw you. He paused. Until yesterday, when you became the only person who could solve a problem I couldn't solve. The only person with the skills and the courage to step into the middle of a street with a rifle and save 7 lives. Nora waited for the point. I have a question, Vance said. You're entirely free to say no. All right. The county has been talking about adding deputy positions, part-time, for the eastern settlements, someone who knows the land, someone who can handle difficult situations. He reached into his desk, pulled out a badge, set it on the desk between them. I'd like to offer you one of those positions. Nora looked at the badge, small, 5-pointed star, the word deputy stamped into the metal. Part-time? She asked. You'd keep your homestead, your life. But when something comes up that needs handling in the Eastern Territory, you'd be the person I'd call. What kind of things? Disputes, investigations, occasionally things like yesterday. Vance paused. It doesn't pay much, but it's official, recognized by the county, and it means the next time someone needs help, we'll know who to ask. Nora thought about it, about the homestead 6 miles east, about the promise she'd made to Thomas, about who would keep the land if she was gone. I'd need to arrange for someone to check on my place when I'm away, she said. That can be arranged. And I'd still come to town on my schedule, not yours. Understood. Nora looked at the badge again, at Sheriff Vance, at this offer that meant being seen, being known, being the person people called when things needed handling. She thought about Thomas, about what he'd said the day before he died. You're stronger than they know, stronger than you know. She picked up the badge. When did you order this? She asked. Vance smiled. Thursday, 3 days ago. Before yesterday. Before anyone knew your name, Vance said. But after I watched you read that bank situation like you'd written the manual yourself. I knew then. Nora turned the badge over in her hands. The metal was cool, solid. All right, she said. I'll do it. Thank you, Mrs. Cole. Nora, she said. If we're going to work together, you should call me Nora. Vance stood, extended his hand. Dale. They shook. Nora left Marrow Creek an hour later. The badge was in her pocket. The Sharps was in its scabbard. The wagon was loaded with grain. As she rode east toward the homestead, she thought about the last 24 hours, about stepping out of the shadows, about being seen, about the fact that for 12 years she'd been invisible by choice and by circumstance, and by the town's collective failure to look, and about the fact that now, whether she wanted it or not, everything had changed. The quiet woman from the Cole place had become Deputy Cole. She wasn't sure yet how that would feel, but she knew Thomas would have called it interesting. 3 weeks passed. Nora fell back into the rhythm of the homestead. The land didn't care about badges or bank robberies. It cared about water and fence repair, and the 100 small tasks that kept a place running. She wore the badge when she came to town, left it in a drawer the rest of the time. The town treated her differently now, not dramatically, but the shift was there. People who'd nodded before now stopped to talk. People who'd looked past her now looked at her. It was strange, not bad, just strange. On the 3rd Friday after the bank incident, Vance sent word that he needed to see her. She wrote in that afternoon. "We've had an interesting development," Vance said when she arrived at his office. "What kind?" "The kind involving Dutch Rearin and a story that connects to you." Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What kind of story?" "Maybe you should hear it from him. Dutch was in the first cell. He'd lost weight. Jail food and waiting for trial did that. But he still had that same controlled energy, the professional calm. He stood when Nora approached. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "or should I say Deputy Cole now? Either works. Sheriff Vance said you wanted to talk to me." "I did." Dutch gestured to the chair outside the cell. "Mind if we sit? This might take a minute." Nora sat. Dutch settled back on his cot. "I've been thinking about you," he said. "About how you handled that situation, about the way you moved, the way you thought. And it reminded me of something. Someone, actually." He paused. "My half-brother, Jake." Nora's expression didn't change, but inside something went very still. "Jake died about 5 years ago," Dutch continued. "Bar fight in Caldwell. Stupid way to go after everything he'd survived." "I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be. Jake was a bastard. I loved him anyway, but he was still a bastard." Dutch leaned forward. "Thing is, before he died, Jake told me a story. About 7 or 8 years back, he tried to rob a homestead east of some town. Never told me which town. Said he rode in at night. Thought it'd be easy. Woman alone." Nora's hands were very still in her lap. "Said something shot his horse out from under him," Dutch said. "In the dark. From a distance he couldn't see. He hit the ground hard, got up, looked around. Never saw what shot him. Never saw anyone. Just darkness and his dead horse." He paused. "Said he ran. Limped west. Made it to the next town on foot. Told everyone who'd listen about the ghost that protected that homestead. The thing that shot from the shadows and never missed." Dutch looked at Nora directly. "That was you, wasn't it?" Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then, "A man rode onto my land 7 years ago, late at night. I could see his intent before he got close. I shot his horse. He left. I never saw him again." "Jake?" "I didn't know his name. He never knew yours either. Just called you the ghost or the devil, depending on how drunk he was." Nora processed that. "You came to Marrow Creek because of that?" "No." Dutch shook his head. "I came here because it's a small bank on a good route out. Had nothing to do with Jake. I didn't even know this was the town until after we got arrested." "How did you find out?" "Town gossip," Dutch said. "People talking about what happened 7 years ago. Someone mentioned that time someone tried to rob the Cole place and his horse got shot in the dark. I heard Cole place and 7 years and I put it together." He smiled without humor. "Small world. My brother tries to rob you. Fails. Dies later in Caldwell. 7 years later I try to rob your town's bank. Fail. End up in jail." He paused. "You're bad luck for the Rearin family, Mrs. Cole." "I didn't ask your brother to come to my land." "No, you didn't. And you were right to defend it." Dutch leaned back. "I told the sheriff this story yesterday. He asked me to tell you directly." "Why?" "Because he thought you might want to know that the man whose horse you shot, the man you've probably been wondering about for 7 years, he didn't die out there in the dark. He made it out, lived 5 more years, Died in a fair fight that was his own damn fault. Nora felt something loosen in her chest, a weight she'd been carrying for so long she'd stopped noticing it. "He didn't die because of me," she said quietly. "No, ma'am. He died because he picked a fight with a man who was faster. That's on him." They sat in silence for a moment. "Why tell me this?" Nora asked. Dutch considered the question. "Professional respect, I guess. You protected what was yours twice now, first against Jake, then against us. Both times you could have killed, both times you chose not to." He gestured to his hand. "Lark still can't believe you shot the gun out of his hand and left him whole. Says it's impossible." "It's not impossible. It's difficult. There's a difference." "That's what I mean," Dutch said. "You know exactly what you can do and exactly what you choose to do. That's rare, especially out here." He paused. "I don't know what you did before you came to this town, Mrs. Cole. But you weren't always a farmer's wife. Nobody gets that good with a rifle just shooting coyotes." "I was always a farmer's wife," Nora said. "The rifle just came with the territory. Things need shooting on a homestead. You learn or you lose stock." "Maybe," Dutch said. "Or maybe you're just that good at being underestimated." Nora stood. "Thank you for telling me about your brother." "One more thing," Dutch said. "That promise you kept. The one about not killing him when you could have." "What about it?" "Dead men don't stand trial. That's what you said." "That's right. Jake needed to stand trial too, for things he'd done before he got to your land. He never did, but you gave him the chance to." Dutch met her eyes. "I respect that more than you know." Nora nodded, turned to leave. "Mrs. Cole," Dutch called. She looked back. "Watch yourself out there. World's full of people like Jake, like me. We see someone alone and we think, easy. Most of the time we're wrong, but sometimes we get lucky. I'll keep that in mind. Do that. And next time someone asks if you're a sharpshooter, maybe don't wait until they're robbing the bank to answer." Despite herself, Nora almost smiled. She left the jail and walked back into the afternoon sun. 7 years of wondering. 7 years of carrying the question of whether she'd killed a man in the dark and never known it. Now she knew. Jake Rearin had lived, had died later, on his own terms, in his own fight. The blood on the sharps she couldn't see, it had never been there. That night Nora rode home to the homestead. The badge was in her pocket. The relief about Jake Rearin was settling into her bones. But there was something else now, a restlessness she couldn't quite name. She unsaddled the horse, fed her, checked the fence line, did all the evening tasks that needed doing. Then she sat on the porch and watched the sunset. Thomas's grave was on the hill to the west. She could see it from here, a simple wooden cross. His name, the dates. She'd been keeping his promise for 12 years. Don't let them take it, the land. Don't let anyone tell you a woman can't hold it. She'd done that. She'd kept it, through drought and flood and winter and loss. But now she was a deputy. Now she was the person Sheriff Vance called when things needed handling. And she was starting to wonder if keeping the promise meant staying, or if it meant something else. The next morning she rode up to Thomas's grave. She did this sometimes, not often, but when she needed to think through something difficult she came here, sat on the ground beside the cross, talked to the silence. "I don't know what to do," she said to the grave, to Thomas, to the memory of him. "I promised you I'd keep the land, and I have. But now they're asking me to be something else, someone who goes where she's needed." The wind moved through the prairie grass. No answer. There never was. "If I go, who keeps the promise?" She sat there for a long time. The sun rose higher. The heat built. She was about to leave when she saw it. The light was hitting the hill differently, the rock formation behind the grave. There was a pattern there she'd never noticed before, not natural. She stood, walked closer, looked at the rocks. Someone had placed them deliberately, years ago, carefully. She reached out, touched one. It moved. Behind it, a gap, a hollow in the hill. Her heart started beating faster. She pulled the rock away, then another, then another. Inside the hollow, a metal box, rusted at the edges but intact. She pulled it out, set it on the ground, opened it. Inside, a journal, Thomas's handwriting, and a letter, addressed to her. She sat down, hands shaking slightly, opened the letter. Thomas's words, written in the months before he died, hidden for her to find, if she ever found it. My dearest Nora, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've kept the land long enough to find this spot. I knew you would. You're the most stubborn, most capable person I've ever known. I hid this letter because I wanted you to find it when you were ready, when keeping the promise stopped being about me and started being about you. The land doesn't matter, Nora. You do. I know what I said when I was dying. Don't let them take it. Don't let anyone tell you a woman can't hold it. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The promise wasn't about the land. It was about you. I knew you could keep it, knew you'd fight for it, knew you'd prove every person wrong who thought a woman alone couldn't survive. And you did. But I also knew that one day something else would call you, some other purpose, some other way to use the strength I saw in you from the day we met. When that day comes, don't let the promise hold you back. The promise was never about staying in one place. It was about trusting yourself, knowing what you're capable of, not letting anyone tell you what you can't do. So if you need to go, if someone needs you somewhere else, go. The land will be here. It's dirt and grass and memories. Important, but not as important as who you become. Whatever comes next, Nora, you'll know if it's right. You always did know. You just didn't always trust it. Trust it now. I loved you for your strength, your patience, your quiet certainty about what mattered. Those things aren't tied to this land. They're tied to you. Take them wherever they're needed. With all my love. Thomas. Nora read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on the hill beside his grave and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from understanding. For 12 years she'd thought the promise meant staying, meant keeping the physical land, meant not leaving. But Thomas had known better. He'd known she'd need permission to go. Permission to become something more than the woman on the homestead. He'd given it to her, hidden it where she'd find it when she was ready. She folded the letter carefully, put it back in the box, put the box back in the hollow, replaced the rocks. The secret would stay here, safe, waiting for her if she ever needed to remember. But she didn't need to carry it with her. She already knew what it said. She stood, looked at the grave, at the cross with Thomas's name. Thank you, she said, for trusting me, for seeing who I could be. The wind moved through the grass. She walked back down the hill. The promise wasn't broken. It was fulfilled. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Nora was mending fence when she saw the rider coming. Mail didn't usually come to the homestead. She rode into town for it. But the rider, a young man from the county office, rode right up to her door. Mrs. Cole, Deputy Cole. Yes. Letter for you, marked urgent. He handed it over, tipped his hat, rode back toward town. Nora looked at the envelope. Return address, Bitter Springs, 4 counties west. She didn't know anyone in Bitter Springs. She opened it. Deputy Nora Cole. My name is Catherine Brennan. I'm a school teacher in Bitter Springs. I'm writing to you because I don't know who else to ask. 3 women have disappeared from this town in the last 6 months. Mary Ketchum in March, Sarah Donnelly in June, Elizabeth Price in September. The sheriff says they ran away, left town, went to California or Denver or somewhere that isn't here. But I know these women. I taught with Mary. Sarah was my neighbor. Elizabeth was my friend. They didn't run away. I've tried to convince the sheriff to investigate. He won't listen. Says women leave towns all the time. Says there's nothing to investigate. The town council won't hear me. They say I'm being hysterical, that I'm a woman imagining patterns where there aren't any. But there are patterns. All 3 women lived alone. All 3 were seen talking to the same man the week before they disappeared. A man who works at the mill. Name of Garrett Finch. I've tried to look into it myself. But I'm a school teacher. Nobody takes me seriously. And when I asked too many questions, I started getting warnings, anonymous notes, suggestions that maybe I should stop. Then I heard about you. A woman in Marrow Creek who saved a bank, who stopped 3 armed men, who doesn't need permission to do what's right. I know this isn't your town. I know you don't owe me anything. But if you could come, if you could look into this, if you could help when no one else will, I would be grateful beyond words. Please. Catherine Brennan. Bitter Springs. Nora read the letter twice. Then she sat on her porch and looked west toward the setting sun. 3 women. Disappeared. Nobody listening. A schoolteacher asking for help because no one else would give it. She thought about Thomas's letter, about the promise being about trusting herself, about going where she was needed. She thought about 12 years of being invisible because nobody bothered to look. She thought about Catherine Brennan, probably being ignored the same way, dismissed, told she was imagining things. That night she rode into Marrow Creek, found Sheriff Vance at his office. "I need to go to Bitter Springs," she said. He looked up from his paperwork. "What's in Bitter Springs?" She handed him the letter. He read it. 3 missing women, he said, and a sheriff who won't investigate. That's what she says. You believe her? I believe she's asking for help and no one's listening. Vance set the letter down. Bitter Springs is 4 counties over, out of my jurisdiction, out of yours technically. I know. If you go, you're going as a private citizen, not as a deputy. I understand. Vance studied her. How long will you be gone? I don't know. However long it takes. And the homestead? I'll arrange for someone to check on it. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer, pulled out a second badge, pinned it to a piece of paper. This is a territorial deputy commission. Broader authority, crosses county lines. He slid it across the desk. Technically, I can't issue this without county approval, but I know the clerk. She owes me a favor. Nora looked at the badge. You're bending rules for me. I'm recognizing that sometimes the rules get in the way of what's right. Vance met her eyes. 3 women are missing. A school teacher is asking for help. You're the only person who's answered. He paused. Go to Bitter Springs. Look into it. If you need backup, send word. I'll come. Nora picked up the badge. Heavier than the first one. More weight in multiple senses. Thank you, Dale. Don't thank me yet. Bitter Springs has a reputation. Hard town, mining and mill work. Not friendly to outsiders asking questions. I'll manage. I know you will. Vance smiled slightly. Just remember, you're not invisible anymore. People know your name now. Use that if you need to. Nora left his office and walked to the mercantile. She bought supplies, enough for 2 weeks, ammunition for the sharps, coffee and jerky and hardtack. Mrs. Patterson packed it carefully. Going somewhere, Mrs. Cole? Bitter Springs, for a while. That's a hard ride west. I've ridden harder. Mrs. Patterson paused. Someone needs help. 3 someones, maybe. Then you go help them. She finished packing. And you come back when you're done. This town's gotten used to having you around. Nora paid, loaded her saddlebags. By morning she'd be ready to leave. That night she sat on her porch one last time, looked at the land, at Thomas's grave on the hill, thought about the promise, about what it meant to keep it. For 12 years she'd thought it meant staying. Now she knew it meant going where she was needed, using the strength Thomas had seen in her, becoming the person she'd been building herself into all along. Deputy Nora Cole, the woman who'd been invisible for 12 years, the woman who'd stepped into the street when no one else could, the woman who was riding to Bitter Springs because a school teacher asked for help and no one else had answered. She went inside, packed the rest of her gear. The sharps went into its scabbard. The badges went into her pocket. The letter from Catherine Brennan went into her coat. By dawn she was on her horse, riding west, toward Bitter Springs, toward 3 missing women, toward whatever waited there. The quiet woman from the coal place was leaving, and whoever was in Bitter Springs making women disappear had no idea she was coming. Dawn came cold to Marrow Creek. Nora was already awake. She'd been awake for an hour. Some mornings you wake and you know the day is going to change things. This was one of those mornings. She'd packed everything the night before. The sharps wrapped in oilcloth, ammunition, supplies for 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she was careful, the territorial deputy badge in her coat pocket next to the letter from Catherine Brennan. She saddled the paint mare in the half-light before sunrise. The horse knew something was different. Horses always did. They could read intention in the way you moved, the way you loaded the saddlebags. This wasn't a trip to town for grain. This was something else. She rode into Marrow Creek as the sun broke over the eastern hills. Main Street was empty, too early for most folks. The saloon was closed. The mercantile wouldn't open for another hour, but there was smoke coming from the chimney at the sheriff's office. Vance was an early riser, too. She tied her horse outside and went in. Vance was at his desk with coffee and paperwork. He looked up when she entered. "Thought you might come by before you left," he said. "Wanted to let you know I was going." "Appreciated." He stood, poured a second cup of coffee from the pot on the stove, handed it to her. "Sit, we've got a few minutes." Nora sat. The coffee was strong and hot, the way it should be. They drank in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind, between people who understood each other. "You know you don't have to go," Vance said finally. "That letter, those missing women, that's not your responsibility." "I know. But you're going anyway." "I am." Vance nodded. "Why?" Nora thought about that, about Thomas's letter, about 12 years of being invisible, about stepping into the street with the sharps. "Because no one else answered," she said. "And I know what it's like to need help and have everyone look past you." "You think that's what's happening to this school teacher?" "I think she asked the people who should have helped and they told her she was imagining things. I think she's desperate enough to write to a stranger 4 counties away." Nora paused. "And I think if 3 women really are missing, someone needs to care enough to find out why." Vance studied her over his coffee cup. "You've changed, you know, these last few weeks." "Have I?" "You're still quiet, still careful. But there's something else now. Like you've decided something about yourself." Nora considered that. "Maybe I have." "What did you decide?" "That being invisible was useful for a long time, but it's not who I am anymore." They finished their coffee. Vance walked her outside to her horse. The sun was higher now. A few people were starting to move on the street. The town was waking up. "How long do you think you'll be gone?" Vance asked. "Don't know. Could be a week. Could be longer. And if you need help, I'll send word." Vance reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope, handed it to her. "What's this?" "Letter of introduction. To the sheriff in Bitter Springs, fellow named McCready. Don't know him personally, but I've heard he's difficult. This might help, or it might not, but it's official either way." Nora took the letter, put it in her saddlebag. "Thank you, Dale." "Don't thank me, just come back." He paused. "This town got used to having you around. Be ashamed to lose you now." "I'll come back." "See that you do." She mounted the horse, settled into the saddle. The mare shifted beneath her, ready to move. "Nora," Vance said. She looked down at him. "That thing you did, with the bank, with Lark in the loading area." He paused. "That wasn't luck. That was skill built over years, years when nobody was watching." "I know. I just want you to know that I see it now. We all do. And we should have seen it before." Nora nodded. "The thing about being invisible, Dale, sometimes it's useful, and sometimes it's just lonely." "Which one was it for you?" "Both," she said. She rode south down Main Street, past the bank where she'd saved 7 lives, past Miller's feed where she'd heard the first shot, past the hardware store where she'd lain flat on the roof and waited for the moment to present itself. People were coming out now, opening shops, starting their day. They saw her, nodded, said her name. "Morning, Mrs. Cole." "Deputy Cole." "Safe travels, ma'am." She nodded back, touched the brim of her hat. One woman, Sarah Brennan, the mother from the bank, stood on the sidewalk with her son. The boy Daniel waved. Nora raised her hand. A small wave back. The woman mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Nora nodded, rode on. At the south edge of town she turned east. One more stop before she headed west. The homestead was 6 miles. She could make it in under an hour. The sun was fully up now. The September heat was building, but there was a coolness underneath it. Fall coming, the seasons turning the way they always did. She rode across prairie that she knew by heart. Every rise, every draw, every creek crossing. This land had been her whole world for 12 years. Now she was leaving it. Not forever, but for now. The homestead looked the same as it always did. Small, weathered, enduring. She dismounted, walked through the house one more time, made sure everything was secure. The windows latched, the stove cold, the supplies stored properly. She'd arranged for a neighbor, Jacob Turner, who ran the spread 3 miles north, to check on the place while she was gone. Feed the chickens, make sure nothing fell apart. He'd been surprised when she'd asked, "You going somewhere, Mrs. Cole?" "For a while." "Sheriff business?" "Something like that." He'd agreed, asked no more questions. That was the way of it out here. People respected privacy. She walked up the hill to Thomas's grave. The cross stood against the blue sky. Simple, weathered. His name barely visible now after 12 years of wind and rain and sun. She sat down beside it, like she'd done 100 times before. "I'm going west," she said to the silence, to the memory, to a town called Bitter Springs, to help someone who asked. The wind moved through the grass. "I read your letter. I understand now what you meant. About the promise. About it being about me, not the land." She paused. "I kept it, Thomas. For 12 years I kept it. And I'll keep keeping it. But now I know what that means." She touched the cross. The wood was warm from the sun. "Thank you for seeing who I could be, even when I didn't see it myself." She stood, looked west, toward Bitter Springs, toward whatever waited there. "I'll come back," she said, "but I need to go first." She walked back down the hill, mounted her horse, rode west without looking back. The ride to Bitter Springs would take 4 days, maybe 5 depending on weather and how hard she pushed. She had time to think, time to plan, time to wonder what she was riding into. 3 missing women, a sheriff who wouldn't investigate, a school teacher being warned to stop asking questions. It could be nothing. Women did leave town sometimes, went looking for better lives, better opportunities. But Nora didn't think it was nothing. Catherine Brennan's letter had the sound of someone who'd seen a pattern, who knew something was wrong, who was being ignored because of who she was. A woman, a school teacher, someone people could dismiss. Nora knew that feeling. She'd been dismissed for 12 years. Not anymore. On the second day she stopped at a way station, small place, run by an old couple who asked no questions and served hot food and cold beer. A man at the bar recognized her. "You're that woman from Marrow Creek, the one who stopped the bank robbery." "I am. I heard about that. 3 armed men, hostages. You shot the gun right out of one fellow's hand." "Something like that." "That true?" "True enough." The man shook his head. "Hell of a thing. Woman doing what a whole town of men couldn't." Nora didn't correct him. Let him think what he wanted. But as she left, she heard him tell someone else, "That's Deputy Cole. You see the rifle she's carrying, sharps, long barrel, serious equipment." Word was spreading. The quiet woman from Marrow Creek was becoming a story. She wasn't sure how she felt about that yet. On the 4th day she saw Bitter Springs in the distance, bigger than Marrow Creek, maybe 500 people. Mill town. She could see the lumber operation on the north side, smoke from the mill stacks, the sound of saws even at this distance. She rode in slow, took her time, looked at everything. The main street was busier than Marrow Creek. More commerce, more people, more noise. But underneath it she felt something, Attention, like a town holding its breath. She found the sheriff's office, tied her horse outside, checked the sharps, made sure the badge was visible on her coat. Then she walked inside. The sheriff was a big man, thick through the shoulders, face like weathered leather. He looked up when she entered. "Help you, Sheriff McCready." "That's right. I'm Deputy Nora Cole from Marrow Creek. I have a letter of introduction from Sheriff Vance." She handed him the envelope. McCready opened it, read. His expression didn't change. "Says here you're investigating a matter in my jurisdiction." "I am." "What matter would that be?" "3 missing women, Mary Ketchum, Sarah Donnelly, Elizabeth Price." McCready's jaw tightened. "Those women left town, of their own accord." "You investigated?" "Didn't need to. Women leave towns all the time. All 3 knew each other. All 3 disappeared within 6 months. All 3 were seen with the same man before they vanished." "Who told you that?" "Catherine Brennan, schoolteacher." McCready's expression darkened. "Miss Brennan has been spreading unfounded accusations, making trouble where there isn't any, or asking questions that need asking." "Deputy Cole." McCready stood. He was a tall man, used his size to intimidate. "I don't know how things work in Marrow Creek, but in Bitter Springs we don't appreciate outsiders coming in and stirring up settled matters." "Settled how?" "The women left. That's settled." "Did you check their homes? Interview their friends? Talk to the man they were seen with?" "I didn't need to. There's no crime here." Nora looked at him, at the way he was standing, the way he was talking, the defensiveness. He wasn't just uninterested in investigating, he was actively preventing it. "I'd like to speak with Miss Brennan," Nora said. "You can do what you want, long as you don't interfere with town business. And if I find evidence of a crime, then you bring it to me. This is my jurisdiction." Nora nodded. "Understood." She turned to leave. "Deputy Cole," McCready called. She looked back. "That story about you in Marrow Creek, the bank, that true enough. You shot a gun out of a man's hand, 70 feet, moving target." "Something like that." McCready studied her. "You're good with that rifle." "I am. Be a shame if something happened to it, or to you. Bitter Springs can be a dangerous town for people who ask the wrong questions." Nora held his gaze. "I'll keep that in mind, Sheriff." She walked out. She found Catherine Brennan at the schoolhouse, a small building on the east side of town. The woman was younger than Nora expected, maybe 30, brown hair, tired eyes, the look of someone who'd been fighting alone for too long. "Deputy Cole, Miss Brennan." "You came." Catherine's voice broke slightly. "You actually came. You asked for help." "I didn't think anyone would answer." "I did." Catherine sat down at one of the small school desks, like her legs had stopped holding her up. "They're telling you I'm crazy. Aren't they hysterical? Imagining things." "Sheriff McCready suggested you were stirring up trouble." "I'm stirring up truth. That's different." "Tell me about the women," Nora said. They talked for 2 hours. Catherine had evidence. Not proof, but patterns. All 3 women had complained about Garrett Finch in the weeks before they disappeared. The man who worked at the mill said he made them uncomfortable, followed them, showed up places he shouldn't be. All 3 had been planning to leave Bitter Springs eventually, but not immediately, not without telling anyone. All 3 had personal belongings left behind, clothes, keepsakes, things women didn't leave if they were choosing to go. "I went to their homes," Catherine said, "before anyone else could. Mary's sewing was still on the table, half finished. Sarah's pantry was full of preserves she'd put up for winter. Elizabeth left her mother's ring. She never took it off." "You told the sheriff this." "He said women forget things when they're in a hurry to leave." "And Garrett Finch, untouchable. His uncle owns the mill, employs half the town. Sheriff won't cross him." Nora thought about that, about power, about who gets protected and who gets ignored. "Where can I find Finch?" "He works the morning shift at the mill, lives in a cabin north of town." "I'll talk to him." Catherine looked at her. Be careful. There's something wrong with him. You can see it in his eyes. I've dealt with men like that before. Not like him. Nora stood. I'll be careful. But I'm going to find out what happened to those women. Catherine stood too, grabbed Nora's hand. Thank you. Thank you for believing me. I believe you because I know what it's like when people don't listen. Nora left the schoolhouse as the sun was setting. She found a boarding house, rented a room, small, clean, a bed and a window overlooking the street. She set the sharps by the door, the badges on the table. Then she sat and thought about what Catherine had told her. 3 women. Missing. Likely dead. A man everyone suspected but no one would touch. A sheriff who was either complicit or cowardly. And her. A deputy from 4 counties away with no jurisdiction and a rifle. She thought about Thomas. About what he'd said in his letter. You'll know if it's right. You always did know. She knew this was right. Finding the truth. Giving those women justice even if they were gone. Making sure Catherine Brennan wasn't alone anymore in knowing something was wrong. Tomorrow she'd start asking questions. And whoever Garrett Finch was, whatever he'd done, he was about to discover that the quiet woman from Marrow Creek wasn't quiet when it mattered. She woke before dawn. Old habit. Checked the sharps. Loaded. Ready. Put on the territorial deputy badge, the one that crossed county lines. Went downstairs. Had coffee. Listened to the boarding house owner talk about the mill. About Finch. Strange one, that boy. Always was. Even as a child. His mother died when he was young. Father drank himself to death. Uncle took him in, gave him work. But there's something not right in him. How so? Can't put my finger on it, just wrong. Women don't like being around him. Smart women, anyway. Has anyone reported problems with him? Few tried. Sheriff told them they were being oversensitive. Nora finished her coffee. Stood. Where you going? The owner asked. To talk to Garrett Finch. Be careful, deputy. He's got protection. So did the men who robbed the bank in Marrow Creek. I heard about that. You really shoot a gun out of a man's hand. I did. The owner smiled. Then maybe Garrett Finch should be the one being careful. Narrator's voice returns warm and contemplative. That's where we leave Nora Cole tonight, standing in a boarding house in Bitter Springs, badge on her chest, Sharp's rifle in her hand, about to walk into a situation that the local law won't touch. She didn't come here to be a hero. She came because a school teacher asked for help and no one else answered. But here's the thing about Nora Cole. The thing that took Marrow Creek 12 years to see. She never needed to be asked twice. She never needed permission. And she never walked away when someone needed what she could do. 3 women are missing in Bitter Springs. Maybe dead. Maybe worse. A man named Garrett Finch is walking free because he's protected. A sheriff won't investigate because it's inconvenient. And a school teacher named Catherine Brennan just got the only backup she's going to get. One woman, 53 years old, with a Sharps rifle and 12 years of being underestimated. You know what happens to people who underestimate the quiet ones? They find out too late that quiet doesn't mean weak. It doesn't mean afraid. It doesn't mean unprepared. Sometimes quiet just means patient, waiting for the right moment, watching, learning, understanding, and then when the moment comes, acting with a precision that leaves no room for doubt. Nora Cole was invisible for 12 years in Marrow Creek, not because she was small, because everyone else wasn't looking. But on a Friday in September 1879, a door opened, the one nobody expected, and the woman who walked out changed everything. She saved 7 lives, earned a badge, became the person Sheriff Vance called when things needed handling, and now she's in Bitter Springs. And Garrett Finch has no idea she's coming. Some doors open quietly, but when they do, everything changes. Some people carry what they are so quietly for so long that the world forgets to ask. And then one day the world needs it. And there she is. Watch the quiet ones. They're the ones who've been preparing for years, building strength in the shadows, learning skills nobody asked about, becoming exactly who they need to be. So that when the moment comes when someone needs help and no one else will answer, they're ready. They've always been ready. You just weren't looking. The sun rises over Bitter Springs. A woman in a work dress walks down Main Street, Sharp's rifle carried easy, badge catching the morning light. She's heading north, toward the mill, toward answers. And somewhere in Marrow Creek on a hill facing west, a wooden cross stands in the prairie grass. Thomas Cole's grave, watching over land his wife promised to keep. She kept it, and now she's keeping a different promise. To be who she became, to go where she's needed, to never let being quiet mean being powerless. Fade to the horizon, a rider heading west, the endless prairie, the story continuing beyond what we can see, because some legends don't end, they just ride on,